this computer. And 1 second. Hi everyone, welcome to New Music Gathering Day 5, I believe. We're thrilled to welcome you all. I'm Angelica, I'm one of the co-organizers of the New Music Gathering, which is a conference and festival hybrid for music makers and thinkers. And today we have two very exciting talks. We're going to get started right away with Tiffany Chang presenting on the presentation of Oberlin Arts and Sciences and Orchestra Zoom commissions. Take it away, Tiffany.
Thank you, Angelica, for having us. My name is Tiffany Chang, and I am thrilled to be here. And I want to thank everyone at the New Music Gathering for having us. It is an absolute pleasure to be sharing this live to Zoom work that I commissioned throughout the pandemic called Straight into Tangles by Ralph Lewis. A little bit about me. I'm a conductor based in the Boston area. I'm currently on the faculty at Berklee College of Music and Oberlin Conservatory. I conduct the Oberlin Arts and Sciences Orchestra, which is an orchestra for non-performance majors and community members. During the pandemic, I asked Ralph to write a full orchestral work for this orchestra to be performed entirely on Zoom. And Ralph is here with us today, along with Carl and Ava, two members of the orchestra. Carl is a cellist and a composer, and Ava is a percussionist, and both are super dedicated to the orchestra. And so the plan is for us to talk for about 10 minutes and then share our performance of this work, and then end with about 10 minutes of Q&A, responding to any of your questions or thoughts about what we're going to share with you. So to start, instead of telling you play by play what we did, I thought I'd frame my introduction with why we did what we did. We all know that during the pandemic, all artists found ourselves solving problems to stay afloat, to stay creative, to stay engaged with our colleagues, to stay in touch with our audiences and communities. My orchestra and I had to solve those problems, as all of you had to, I'm sure. Some musicians were unable to come back on campus because of the school's COVID regulations, which were fairly strict. And we also had the problem of not being able to perform full orchestral works because we simply didn't fit within the required social distancing guidelines. So Zoom was really the only place that we could all gather together and engage in some musical activity. Now, when we think of Zoom for musicians, the first thing that comes to mind are its limitations. Its latency problems, its sound quality, the financial requirements for good recording equipment, and also the heavy reliance on post-production for the thousands of pandemic videos that we've all seen on the internet. So in this commission, I was really clear about our premise in order to overcome and embrace those limitations. First, the piece had to be inclusive. We didn't require any particular equipment besides a laptop or phone and its built-in microphones. Some people had their own external microphones, which worked well, but not everybody had the same equipment. And so everyone who wanted to participate could participate. Secondly, the piece had to be recorded live to Zoom. I wanted to embrace Zoom as a medium, and post-production editing and stitching individual sound files together just didn't quite make sense. And so we spent more than a semester experimenting with what we fed into Zoom. And Ralph simply took whatever it spit back out as the foundational material for his work. And based on these unique premises, I wanted the piece to lend itself well also to unique video presentation methods that were perhaps less traditional than most of the pandemic videos that we're used to. And I was willing to edit video, but not take 40 different videos and edit them into little squares. we've seen that too much, and it's really not aligned with the essence of the experimental nature of the piece. So we're really excited to share what we've created. My initial vision was way different than what we ended up with, and it was really a collective effort between conductor, composer, and all of the musicians. So now, before we play our performance for you, I love to give the floor to Ralph, Ava, and Carl to share a thought or two about how this experience was for them and what it meant for them. Ralph, would you like to take it away?
Oh, sure. I guess one thing I'd like to say is that even though these are not ideal times, many of the foundational questions that Tiffany brought up when we first started collaborating are some of the most exciting questions for me. How do we serve an ensemble? How do we solve problems? How do we find ways to include people that, if we don't take certain paths, don't get to have, don't get to take part in something? So it was very exciting to be thinking about what we can do in our process to both make the most out of what we can use and include as many people from the ensemble as possible. And so, as also said, it was very fun to start with some really big ideas and then keep on testing, learning, failing, and growing, and eventually find the piece that we did. I started out with this input metaphor, thinking about these, thinking about Mondrian and the clear straight lines and the big bold colors, because we couldn't blend normally, and having an output metaphor where it's kind of like the beauty of a scuffed piece of furniture. And even though like the piece moves past that initial vision, it's definitely like an operating idea that helped flow through the entire process.
And I guess kind of natural to follow up with that. It was very collaborative working on this. So as Tiffany mentioned, I am not just a cellist in the orchestra, I am also something of a composer myself. So something that actually I immediately got excited about was very first rehearsal that I was a part of. Ralph, at the end of the rehearsal, is like, so if you have any ideas, if you can think of anything you'd like about this piece, or you have any thoughts on it, send me an email or speak up. And I think I immediately after just typed up this, I don't even know how long, 2 or 3 pages worth email of, here's what I heard, and there's this suggestion. And then from that, a whole bunch of things happened, and then like there were always discussions happening in the rehearsals and talking about, well, maybe more low end on the strings, and maybe this would work here, and so on and so forth. And a lot of the rehearsals were less trying to rehearse something that was set in stone and more just experimenting with trying a bunch of different new things and seeing how they fit together. Which from a compositional standpoint alone is super interesting, because normally you have kind of, in my experience, you kind of have a piece written beforehand before you even start rehearsing. So it was super exciting getting to collaborate in that way, and it wasn't like sort of a one-person show in that respect.
Yeah, I also found this incredibly engaging for a similar reason. So coming from a percussion perspective, we're always the black sheep of the orchestra, but that was sort of particularly present here, where a lot of the early rehearsals ended up being just what translates well in Zoom. How does Zoom chew up our sound and spit it back out into something that we like? And there's just the shape of the sound out of a percussion instrument ended up being so different that we went through all sorts of stuff. Like one thing we discovered is that one of the largest casualties of Zoom's audio filtering is the attack of a note, which is particularly not great for a percussionist because that is the majority of our sound. So we spent quite a while just seeing how Zoom's background noise filtering worked, how the microphones on our devices worked, and working within those limitations. And just seeing how it came out. And that's actually what led to a last minute decision to switch the percussion parts over from an auditory piece to the visual piece of the string tangling that came at the very end.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your insights into the process. And now I would love to share this video performance with you. So I'm gonna, hopefully it will work, sharing my screen, and I hope you enjoy. Let me try that again. Take two. Yay, congratulations, Ralph. Congratulations, Ava and Carl, for being a part of this. And I'm super excited to have shared that with you. And I know that's probably not what you were expecting. So I'm super excited to hear from everyone who is here in the room. Just look at the chat here. Thank you for everything that's in the chat. Love to hear from the people who are here, and maybe even Ralph, Ava, and Carl about what are you feeling now? Maybe just put 1 or 2 words in the chat of what this performance has made you feel. Grateful, thrilled. Thank you. For me, it's almost surreal. Like, I can't believe I just showed that with all of you. We actually had a premiere about 10 days ago for Ralph on YouTube premiere and also Facebook Live, but this feels very different in this context. So thank you everyone. Timeless, ephemeral. Awesome. So keep putting your thoughts and your reactions in the chat. If you have specific questions, I'd love to see them in the Q&A. See that we actually have a question from Lainey. Curious if you came to feel creative about Zoom constraints, as in, did it ever feel like an instrument more than a medium? I think Ava, why don't you take that away?
Yeah, I think I think it was very much almost the intention of this piece was to use the Zoom constraints as an instrument. Like, I mean, one thing I noticed as a performer is that it sounded different in my ear when we were recording than it did on the recording you just saw there. I don't know how Zoom does its audio compression. I don't know what's going on there. But I think everyone participating in this was hearing something slightly different at the time. So there could have been 40 different recordings made that night. And the way that Zoom takes these long held notes that sort of ended up being the focus of the piece and chops them up and does whatever to them was sort of the overarching instrument. That's the acoustics of the concert hall. Yeah.
And just
I thank you so much for saying that, Ava. I totally agree. That was absolutely my intention walking in with this piece. I have a love for radio art and playing with the actual transmission space. So in this case, that came through so clearly is so exciting. So that makes my heart sing. Thanks for knowing that.
And also to throw on top of that, there's a lot with Zoom that you can do that would, quite frankly, not sound right, I think, in a lot of settings. That's the word I'm looking for. Excuse me. So like, I'm all for all sorts of microtonality and strange sounds and all of that, but there's a certain point where it can be a little difficult to tell what's music and what's noise, and I think sort of the almost regularity of the irregularities of Zoom chopped up what otherwise would have been just noise and made it a lot better.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing that. I think that, from a conductor's perspective, this opportunity allowed me to actually sit in the backseat and allow Ralph and every single musician to really drive the bus. And that was really interesting for me to just see what happened. And Ralph, maybe you can talk a little bit about how the contributions of the orchestra affected your creative process.
Sure. So so we initially had a test group in the fall of last year, And it was there when I started coming up with the initial metaphors and the initial forays into things. And initially it was just about what can survive repeated use and performance on Zoom, because a lot of things just were eaten alive immediately, or if they survived once, they disappear immediately on a second time. And so moving forward, as at least a baseline of material was being forged, then the opportunities to really work with sections and multiple sections in the spring semester, especially like in February going into March, suddenly put us in a space where orchestra members, both individually and as sections, were distinctly clarifying all the questions that were coming up. What does it sound like when 40 people are sending their audio all at once? How do we make that work? How do we solve the issue of woodwinds when they are this tube that blows air straight at a microphone? How do we handle that? There were individual members who had some ideas for how to get into the actual presets. One of the things that inspired me, and I'm not trying to make you blush, Carl, but the go for itness on this one particular rehearsal that we had led me to feel comfortable with bringing in a different kind of cello part. So that's why there's that really intense like cello and bass part in the middle of the piece, because that was the rehearsal when you stepped up and you're like, I can do this, let's try this. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So in the same way, Ava, and I'm not just saying people that are here, but Ava, like we worked on so many different things, you know, and knowing that you and Hillary were game for different ideas, that like and also I guess as a composer, I like the idea that I bring my bit and other people bring their bits. And I love that I came in with this, what if we do a cat's cradle thing for you both, and you both just took it to the moon and back. You know, it's so much cooler than my initial prompt, and I'm so grateful for that. So all on the way, I mean, I mean, yes, I'm the one writing the, you know, the score and trying to direct things in some ways, but it is with tremendously cool insights, conversations, like Carl was saying, all these different opportunities to really check in and try to figure out how to make Zoom work for us.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. There's another question that I think may be right for you too, Ralph, in the chat, in the Q&A. Do you think about the piece like you would a recording with an asynchronous audience, or was there an idea of a live audience, and how did that make us feel about, you know, having a difficult to feel the energy of a live audience watching in a setting?
I mean, honestly, I would love to do this piece again with the whole orchestra with a live audience on the call. I would love to do that. I think that the liveness is ideally the ideal state of this, but it's also one that's always, you know, a scary path. So, you know, it's kind of like the first time when I was younger, I got to visit Urkham, and you know, Urkham is really fancy and all that stuff, and everything broke at that concert. They had to stop midway through a 20-minute solo and just do it again. So as long as the audience is game for, you know, the both the successes and failures of experimentation, I think I'm absolutely game for that. So live or recording. And honestly, I would love to give this another shot and see what happens in a recording space. But I'm very happy with what we have, and I do like the idea about a piece that can be live and living, and and just like these photographs, these moving photographs of what it was at that particular time. Because like, I don't know how you were feeling, Carl and Ava, but I was coming off of feeling really sick from getting my first vaccine shot. So I wasn't feeling great. You can see it in the video, you know. So maybe I'd like to look a little more pretty next time or something, you know. But yeah.
Yeah. I've done multiple recordings for commissions and things like that. because of that, I actually had an actual cello microphone that I spent way too long setting up, and it was this whole hassle, and I regret everything. And this honestly felt way more like a live performance. Maybe not in the sense of the audience, because at a live performance, unless it's like a solo piece, because that's very different. But for something like this where I'm part of a group, to me, the live performance aspect is the having to play with the rest of the group, and you kind of only get one or two shots. Normally one shot, but yeah. So it felt very much, it felt live in the respect that we kind of, I think we did 2 takes in total. 3 takes, okay. But it was not a lot of tries, and it was very much what we get is what we get. And that was sort of the point. So, yeah, I would say to me, it felt much more like a live performance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Carl, that we were on a time constraint, and it was that day, or, and then the time would have passed. So, so thank you, everyone. I know that our time is up, so I do want to wrap things up. I want to thank Ralph, Ava, and Carl for joining me in sharing this commission work with everyone in the Zoom space today. I want to thank everyone in the Zoom space for being here with us. And I put in the chat a link to that video in case you want to check it out again. I know that it's overwhelming as an experience, so it'd be interesting to loop back again and see how you feel about it in a second pass. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, Ralph, Ava, and Carl for sharing this wonderful work. And now we're going to pass it over to the folks from Strange Trace. Who are going to talk to us about producing opera in the time of COVID.
All right. Thank you so much. It was so wonderful to hear from Tiffany and the Oberlin Arts and Sciences Orchestra. That was a super interesting presentation, and actually ties in a lot thematically with some of the stuff that I'll be talking about here today. My name is Elena Stabile. I'm happy today to be representing Strange Trace, a one-ish-year-old contemporary opera company based out of the greater Boston area. I co-run this company along with 5 other singers and composers: Greg Nahabedian, Joshua Scheid, Aaron Matthews, Francis Kresge, and Felix Tomlinson. Felix was originally going to be co-presenting with me today. Unfortunately, he had some unanticipated scheduling issues, but he sends his regards to you all. In lieu of being able to introduce you directly to my wonderful compatriots, I actually want to start by showing a short clip from one of our works from this past year. So bear with me while I screen share. Let's see if I can get this to work. Let's see. Let me know if there's a sound issue.
We can see it, but we are not able to hear it yet.
Okay, we're not able to hear that. Let's see if I can get that to work. I'm not super great at the screen sharing portion of this. Share sound. That should do it.
There we go. Thank you.
All righty.
That's not a real apology. He said he was sorry.
I'm sorry that you're so upset.
See?
That was a bold move of you, Alexandra, telling Heather about your private conversation with Andre.
I think we've all learned how two-faced Alexandra can be.
I think we've all learned how two-faced Alexandra can be.
Don't come for me or you'll regret it.
That sounds like a threat. You are nothing but a
classless,
basic,
spinster,
desperate,
please, trashy,
liar,
cheating,
I have never seen a dumpster fire in a dress before, but here we are. She passes busy season, tells them at desperate beast, children flashing iron, cheating no one. What a vacuous waste of space in knockoff our money.
Nobody wants your kumquat shots, Marianne.
All right. That was a lovely little clip from a work called The Real Me by Paul Smith. So I think that gives you kind of a good sense of what our vibe is as a company. We were officially founded in June 2020. And in the time since then, we have produced a number of projects from micro operas and individual arias to full-length ensemble operas, all of it new music and all of it produced exclusively for the digital medium. Our official mission is to holistically redefine the experience of opera, to create new works in non-traditional venues, and to bring together a community of artists in a fun and supportive environment where all are welcome. So obviously, I think we all know that about a year ago, there was a lot of stuff going on. We've all experienced in one way or another how COVID really changed the landscape of the performance world. And so our company and what we wanted to share with you today is kind of built on this idea of reimagining opera under the immense and unprecedented circumstances of this past year. So let's dig right into that. Pre-pandemic, when we think about opera, we're going to be thinking about things like obviously live performance, large performance spaces, big ornate houses, grand choruses and orchestras, huge numbers of personnel backstage, your prompters, your stage managers, stage hands, your big audiences who get dressed up in gowns and tuxedos, and then most of all, big sound, big drama. That pattern starts to emerge pretty quickly, lots of big things. But come COVID, we lose so many of those things that we typically think about when we think opera. One way or another, opera companies here in the US tend to cater to those big expectations, whether that is due to their staff or the forces of their donors or just the, ingrained expectations of the people who are participating. And so when COVID takes all of that away practically overnight due to the inability to bring people together, so many people in that same place for a single event, it feels like a bit of an existential threat to the entire industry. That's not just for opera either. That's, the entire live entertainment industry suddenly has this rug pulled out from under them. So we all end up wondering, what is the future for all of this? Not just right now, but going forward, if this kind of catastrophe, which displaces so many people as possible, what do we do as artists moving forward? For those of us in Strange Chase, as we started to talk about this around the spring of 2020, we were wondering and asking ourselves these questions of what's left in opera that's worth staying committed to the industry and to the art form. If we break it down, looking back at that list of earlier, the orchestras, the audiences, the backstage staff, all of these people, if you take that away, you're left with big sound and drama. And that to us, the music and the drama still felt accessible. So then the practical question becomes, how do you do it without the orchestras, the sets, the money, the expectations? Our endeavor was to therefore let what's left guide us towards positive innovation. With music and drama being the fundamentals, we look towards creating small, digestible, functional content that requires significantly fewer resources to accomplish. For me personally, this then it's ended up being a really meaningful thought process, because at the beginning of COVID, I felt really defeated by everything that was going on. But through these conversations that the other Strange Tracers and I had, it put me in this place where I could start to recontextualize that issue, to look not at what had been lost, but what was instead gained artistically. So through these early conversations in spring of 2020, we started to conceive of this company being more like a band or a collective that strips away hierarchy and democratizes not just the creation, but also the consumption of opera. Doing so would obviously require a lot of experimentation with form and creative options, and for us to revisit our industry priorities, which, you know, kind of puts us out on a limb a little bit, but we were prepared to do that. And while there are certain kinds of things that we dreamed of that are, you know, currently unattainable, like, you know, putting a show in the back of a van and like going touring to different locations like a band might, under the present circumstances, we wanted to create a space both for ourselves and other people that we would be collaborating with that fostered this creativity while being realistic about our means and working within them, rather than letting the limitations actually limit our capacity to brainstorm and innovate and communicate both between ourselves and with our audiences. So in spite of everything, we felt like we still had a lot to work with. We shared this functional knowledge of the industry, the experience of creating new music in one form or another, and a desire to see the opera industry grow and reach new people through the creation and devising of new opera. While we lacked money, because none of us are rich, we don't have a donor base, but it meant that we weren't under any obligations to form a season and creative choices around the expectations of a specific group of people. That freedom gives us the ability to pivot and not be caught flat-footed by, you know, administrative decisions that's made on high or expectations towards what's traditional. So we thought that we would share some examples for how these ideas manifested during this first season that we've had. One of our first projects that sort of speaks to this experimentation facet of our mission is the Opera Excerpts project. All of these videos, by the way, the three that I'm about to mention, are available on our website, which is strangetrace.org. We selected 3 arias from Felix Gerard's Mother Goose, a drag comic chamber opera, which is a wonderful work. I think the full thing is also available on YouTube. We assigned these 3 arias to 3 of our singers, with another Strange Tracer assigned as a director, and then filmed the results. It's honestly kind of mind-boggling in retrospect, because that was really the first time some of us had done any significant amount of audio or video editing. And yet it ended up being this kind of case study or exploration of the different ways that opera as a digital medium can be presented. So Josh did an aria called Close Your Eyes, which was directed by Aaron. And they chose to film his in a more traditional theatrical setup. So you have a clearly delineated stage area with audience focused acting and camera angles that reflect different possible audience views. Think something akin to like a Met HD production, albeit without the HD. Felix filmed and directed my performance of I'm Now a Swan, aka the Poppers aria. We were actually both here in Minneapolis for that, and were able to convene outside in a safe manner. We were inspired by the opera character's desire to be a Britney Spears-esque pop star, and so our take on the aria was to film it like a sort of 2000s music video, with lots of different locations featuring local sites here in Minneapolis, with a more composed or choreographed cinematography, and a contained storyline, a la something like Oops, I Did It Again. And then finally, Aaron's social media song eschews the entire traditional concept of watching opera, in which you watch someone stand up and sing, and instead features a fun animation that doesn't show people at all, but rather displays visual elements of the text. So you're even further disassociating from familiar aspects of staged opera. Practically speaking, we found that small projects like this are really great for both creators and audiences. It allows for a lot of creative freedom and experimentation, the ability to try out concepts that might not carry in a full length feature, but stand out in this concentrated format. And for an audience, it's digestible and entertaining and gives them the opportunity to experience something new and experimental with a lower risk of feeling overwhelmed. The next example, which I hopefully will be able to play a clip for, is The Missing Piece, which was our first full-length opera written by Greg and featuring the full company. We were keen to have a larger project that met people where they were at. So the experience of being in a Zoom meeting by October 2020, for instance, was pretty keenly felt by the entire swath of the population, I think. Plus, the ability to stream this opera on YouTube allowed people to enjoy the show from the comfort of their own homes. And we also wanted a project that reflected our somewhat fun, goofy, irreverent nature as a company. So we made it a murder mystery and leaned heavily into the style and themes of camp horror that you would see around Halloween. It was really important to us that we make this available to stream online for free, as we did with the Excerpts project and some of our other early works. Accessibility of the arts is core to our mission, both in terms of able-bodiedness. This is viewable from the comfort of your space without having to navigate less accessible areas. Some theaters are not built very well for that. But also in terms of socioeconomic access, we can all recognize that both from the creators and the audience standpoint, opera as a genre and both as an industry has some pretty high barriers to access. It's considered by some to be sort of an acquired taste. You need to have an education to understand or appreciate it. And it takes a long time. Operas are long typically, and it costs a lot to get even a single seat in a theater. On that final element alone, it can be difficult for some people to take that leap and trust that their money spent on a ticket is worth it. So we took all of those elements into account when discussing what we wanted from this project. And so it was relatively short, only about 30 minutes long, so pretty digestible for audiences, a good exposure to the content and to a very modern musical style, but not super long. And it's dramatically accessible and strongly represents our identity as a company. Let's see if I can get this a little bit here. Wanted to show a short bit that is called the Breakout Rooms scene, in which there are effectively two love duets happening simultaneously with overlapping musical themes. So let's see here, share screen, screen 2, and great, sound's working.
Oh, it worked! I'll say it did. It's been a while since anyone's been in my breakout room.
What does that even mean?
Oh, you know. Please don't. He knows.
I can't confirm that.
My breakout room. Harry, please, for the love of God.
At the last corporate retreat, with a hotel balconies adjoining, me reading Austin, you reading the news.
It was the stock report.
Good! You have such boring taste in books.
It's not a book.
But I could watch you read for hours.
Doesn't take hours to read the stock report. Sneaking in through my back door. Oh God. And also my room's back door.
There it is, that famous Francis wit, so dry, with a roll of your eyes, with a hike of your skirt. I mean, what are you talking about?
What am I 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 talking about? I'm talking about us, Francis. I'm talking about love, about the pieces of our puzzles fitting together so perfectly. Don't drag puzzles into this.
Why not? It's how we met. Your tabs and my blinks. I really don't even want to know.
Neither do I. Then say something, Francis. Tell me that this story doesn't end with adjoining balconies and Hotel Manhattans. Say something, Francis, my love.
Don't deny. This is quite a breakout, Felix.
And that's that little clip. All right, stop the share. I saw that there's a question, and I will come back around to that at the end. Okay, so we ended our first season with our Stencils Festival, which was our largest and most ambitious collaborative work. We put out an international call for scores back in fall of 2020 and eventually settled on 5 different proposals created by a collection of absolutely amazing composers and librettists that came from around the world. The collaborative process spanned the entire season and represented our first concerted effort at accessibility for creators, which is another thing we highly value in our mission. Opera can be an intimidating form for creators, given all of these sort of traditional expectations that come along with it, or they might find difficulty getting through the door that first time bringing a work to larger companies. So we wanted to give a space that supported them in taking what was for some of them that first leap into dramatic vocal composition or musical libretto writing. The kinds of creative decisions that we made during the production of the Stencils Festival were really guided by this change of context from live performance to digital production. Everything from early workshops to music recording, even some of the filming, all of that was done at distance. There was a small amount of filming done right towards the end of the spring as vaccinations were rolling out, and we were able to do some stuff safely. But doing all of this stuff at distance meant that our working network expanded from what might have been primarily local individuals if we were doing this live to people all around the country and the world, many of whom we might not otherwise have sought to work with. We also experimented with different kinds of visual storytelling that supports the different kinds of music that our composers gave us. As with many art forms, finding the medium that best represents the content. You already saw this clip from Real Me by Paul Smith, which was inspired by TV shows like Real Housewives. In that one, we really leaned into the idea that the reality show was actually being hosted at distance, with the show host being able to see all of the cameras with them on his television. While not shown in that excerpt, there is a change that happens about 2/3 of the way through that's pretty drastic, where all the camera angles and the relationships of those cameras change. And that's when the characters stop performing for the show and start to consider the things that are actually valuable to them on a personal level. And so we used the change in camera to help reflect the shift, but that happens both in the music and in the characterization of these different people. Actually, I was going to show another excerpt from one of our other shows, Goliath, but I don't think I quite have enough time for that. I will note that in that one, the titular character, Goliath, being the character from biblical story, so the really, really tall guy who goes to war, we played with camera angles that reflect not just where the characters are in space, they're ostensibly in the same room together, but obviously we were filming at distance, so that wasn't going to happen. So we played with that, but also in terms of how tall they were. So our camera angles with Goliath are always sort of from this upward angle, so to project his body taller, whereas the character of the boy, everything is down towards Aaron, who portrayed the boy in that show, to give the sense that they were really, really tiny in comparison. So fun things like that for that show. Ultimately, after a very, very fun admittedly at times kind of stressful, but immensely creatively energizing year. We feel like the upshot to all of this is that digital new opera is a truly engaging and versatile format. And Strange Trace is excited to continue to create digital opera, even as things hopefully begin to open back up again. We realized after all of this that digital opera production is not a compromise for us. The process of creating and sharing these works was just as fulfilling and engaging as a lot of the live performance work we've done. And as an ensemble, this process allowed us to find our artistic voice and carve out a space for ourselves that is not widely occupied in opera and the new music world. So in sharing these thoughts and examples with you today, we hope that regardless of whether you're an opera person or a chamber music person or otherwise, that you really give yourself the opportunity to live outside this box of like standard production and performance practices. COVID may have changed many things about the kinds of opportunities and options that are most readily available to us. And the industry needs to learn to make adjustments for these kinds of things. But that doesn't mean we have to settle for less in terms of our artistic identities and goals. We found a lot of comfort and energy in this idea of finding those elements, identifying the elements that are truly important to you, and then letting those guide and shine in everything that you do. So if you're interested in learning more about Strange Trace, like I said, our website is strangetrace.org. We've got plenty of other videos and information up there. Thank you so much to New Music Gathering for giving me the opportunity to share this with you today. If anyone has any questions or otherwise, I guess we've got a couple minutes here where I could address those. So otherwise, thank you. Let's see.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. It's very clear that your own individual and also collective identity is thriving in this medium, which is really exciting to see. And I'm really curious to know how, as things hopefully start to open up, how this will also remain a big part of your creative output. I believe you answered this already in your presentation, but if there's any other creative or artistic possibilities that opened up as you had to shift to this new virtual medium, that would be great to hear. I know you mentioned a few.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what I already said about that. I think that, so when you're in live performance, regardless of what kinds of things that you do, to bring the stage space to life, you are still confined to a linear storytelling progression, that everything that happens on stage is experienced going from point A to point B. And with using digital stuff, there were some projects that we used where there was some layering of camera angles and things like that, a little bit actually that we saw in the previous talk, but doing that more intentionally to reflect simultaneous but disparate ideas and dramatic moments in a piece. So I think those were some of the options that we didn't even realize until we started actually already filming. And then, talking after, during a filming session and realizing, oh, should we like put these together in a way that is not a linear progression of point A to point B, which was a super cool discovery.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that, because, I hadn't considered that. And it feels like that's more aligned to like Doug is having a moment. It does feel like that's way more aligned to something more of an immersive experience, something that to be able to get that in person, you would need like different rooms and a big space, and the layering possibilities of, and using that as a way of escaping the time-based nature of storytelling and music. It's very, very cool. We have another question from Ralph.
Yeah. So what got easier? So almost none of us at the very beginning of this process had any significant amount of AV either creation or editing experience. And so we kind of had to toss ourselves into the deep end with that and just experiment early on with, finding what tech we had access to, and what were some free editing programs that we could download. And that's why a lot of our very early stuff, we have a work called See You Today, emails from Gary, and then the 3 arias. That's part of why they were so short, is because anyone who's spent time editing knows that, like, even for something that is only 3 to 4 minutes long, and the amount of editing that has to go into that is like exponentially, it grows. And so by starting with smaller projects, we were able to teach ourselves these skills early on. And we learned, once we got around to filming for stencils, that, you know, you want to list ahead of time things like what camera angles you want, what props are you going to prep, and we learned over time how to streamline these processes in order to lessen the amount of time we sort of spent flailing, because there was definitely some flailing that happened early on. But just by doing it more and more, you get used to it. And I'm personally very excited. I think I speak for the entire company when I say that we look forward to doing more of this and getting even better at the things that we've learned so far.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see work that thrives in this medium, just the same with Ralph Louis' piece. So thank you all to all the wonderful panelists for talking with us today and sharing your wisdom. And thank you, athletes, for joining us. We hope to see you. We have a 5 p.m. Central Time concert on YouTube. I'm going to put the link here in case anyone wants to join us for that. And as you know, you can find all the other events. We have 2 more days of the music gathering left. So make sure that you go to the schedule and you check out other panels, talks, and concerts. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much again.